Hey, welcome back guys. Today we're starting a new little series called Plant of the Week. Alright, now way back in the day I used to do Plant and Fish of the Month, but that was a million years ago. So we're going to try something a little bit different. We're going to try a shorter format and see how YouTube likes it. I really hope that I don't have to stretch these videos out to 10 plus minutes just so YouTube will like it. I'm going to really try hard to do this once a week for you guys, just to showcase some plants, because I know that there's people out there that, you're seeing plants in all my tanks. You have questions about, hey, what's that plant? Is it going to work out with my setup? And so that's the whole point of me doing this, is to try and capture some of that information, get you guys some more plant knowledge, and make you better off in your endeavors with your aquariums. So let's go ahead and start with today's, or this week's, Plant of the Week. So this week we're going to focus on Pogostemon helferi, which is the very cool looking foreground plant that you see here. I guess it's also a midground and a background plant here in the desert tank. This is one that people are always asking about, and I wanted to show it off because, well, the main reason is because we haven't moved the desert tank yet, obviously, and who knows what's going to happen in that move. This is one of my tanks that I'm more confident about being able to maintain through the transition, but you never know. So here, let's take a look at this plant. It's a great foreground plant, obviously. It's I have it here in the foreground of my tank, but I also have it in the mid and the background. There's no rules that say a foreground plant has to be in the foreground. It's just where it makes the most sense in a lot of cases because it's a lower plant. But you can see, if we zoom over here to the right, that it can grow quite tall. And so it does that when maybe it doesn't receive enough light. That seems to be the typical scenario where it will grow up taller. That's the case for a lot of aquarium plants though. But if you stay on it and you trim it, then you can get it to maintain this sort of low profile shape. Alright, it doesn't get super tall. And this is some stuff that I've hacked back on a considerable amount. So I've gone through and I've trimmed these plants way down multiple times. Okay, so if it's in a healthy environment where it's doing well, you can put a lot of stress on it as far as trimming goes, and it'll do just fine. Come back perfectly just the way you want it. Most foreground plants, not all of them, but I'd say the vast majority of them are going to be the type that spread naturally through the substrate, so you don't have to do any trimming to produce more of the plants. They're going to produce their own daughter plants by growing through, sending out runners and growing through the substrate. And so that's what has happened to this Pogostemon. It has sent out a bunch of side shoots and it'll pop up a new plant over in a new area. If the plant is growing well, you're going to get this nice carpeting effect that everybody wants. It's sort of weird to consider this a carpeting plant just because it is a stem plant in a lot of ways. Like if you look over here and look at this guy, you'd say, oh, that's a stem of Pogostemon, but then if you come over here, you're obviously referring to a carpet of them, a bed of them in the substrate, but it all just depends on how the plant is doing in your tank, whether or not it's going to just do this and not spread versus wanting to spread out. And so I think there are multiple triggers for why a plant is going to send out runners and form a carpet. One of them is light, so having strong light is always a suggestion when you want to have any carpeting plant carpet. And then my other recommendation is to have a good substrate. So in here we have earthworm castings, so just an organic bottom layer, and then we have a little cap of sand. In my experience, this plant is a heavy root feeder, and so we're giving it everything we need down on the substrate. Now that doesn't mean you have to use something like earthworm castings or an organic potting soil. You could easily get away with using, ADA or fluval stratum or anything else that's gonna have nutrients in it, okay? There's a lot of options out there today, but you don't need to overcomplicate it is what I'm trying to say. Now in the plant world, when we're classifying different plants, a lot of the things that we look at are its lighting requirements and how does it need added nutrients. And the lines can get a little blurry when you talk about those things. This is a plant that I have in a nutrient-rich substrate, so it's getting, X amount of nutrients from that substrate, but it's also probably pulling some from the water column. I don't dose this tank at all, so I'm getting this kind of good semi-aggressive carpeting growth without adding ferts to the water column, but they do have access to nutrients down in the substrate. So I would say maybe don't focus on adding nutrients to your tank with this plant in it right away to get it to grow. I'd focus more on light. And fortunately, lighting doesn't have to be super complicated. Most people run one of 5 different LEDs, and they're all pretty comparable these days, I'd say. This is a Phoenix 24/7 SE, and this is a, you know, how deep is this tank? That's the really important factor, is how deep your tank is. It's a 20 long, so, well, this is probably like a foot. So, is that highlight? I would consider it to be highlight just because all my plants down at the substrate are obviously getting enough light. If they weren't, then I would say my total system is not a highlight system, and then I might want to increase the wattage of my LED, or, you know, the PAR rating that it has. But again, even though there's a lot of choices, pretty much all the lights are going to do the job that you need them to do these days. Unless your tank is like, you know, this tall and you're using this same fixture, then you might not have a highlight situation at the bottom, but I think you guys get the point. I'm just going to make this a 10-minute video, guys. I'm sorry, but it's going to happen. So, Pogostemon, where do you get it? Okay, I got this off of eBay, actually, in the form of a tissue culture. So when we first set this tank up, this is what the Pogostemon looked like. All right, so the cultures that we got in were, I wouldn't say they were unhealthy, but they were definitely lacking as far as like overall foliage goes. And I would have, at that time, I would have loved to see more in the cup, more that we started with. I was really hesitant about what we added to the tank and what its success rate was going to be, but it turned out to be just fine. And I think we owe a lot of that to the substrate in here and just the overall balance system that we were able to create here in the desert tank. So if you decide to go the tissue culture route, I mean, people like to do that because you're not going to be bringing in any snails or any kind of foreign biological entity in with those plants. But that's never really the reason why I go with tissue culture. Some people are into that, but I don't really care if something comes in on the plants that I get. That's just because I've never really had any problems associated with bringing in plants that also came with some pests, but that's up to you. You can also find Pogostemon in potted form. That's pretty much, I think, the only other way that you find this plant. It's hard to get just individual stems of it. You're not going to see that commercially available. At least I haven't. But the pots are also a good way to go. You don't have to wait as long for that plant to transition into your tank when compared to tissue culture. So that's another good option that I would recommend. So yeah, Pogostemon helferi. I think it's a great foreground plant. I would recommend it to beginners. I don't think it's a plant that has a lot of problems. You know, you don't, in my experience, need to dose a lot of ferts to keep it happy. If you have a nutrient substrate, you're going to have that much more success with it and not have to worry about, you know, adding things to your aquarium. And as long as you have a standard, you know, common commercially available light like a Phoenix or a fluval light on a tank that's not super tall, I think you're going to have an easy time with this plant down in your substrate. I think Pogostemon is one of those plants that really pops in an aquascape because it's so bright green and it has this very unique leaf structure. It just turns into kind of the focal point very easily, and I think that can add a lot of power to your scape. I chose it for the desert scape because I thought it really looked like a cactus, like a little underwater cacti, right? And so it just has a lot of versatility, I think. Its ability to grow really low and carpet, and at the same time, you can grow areas of your carpet taller if you want. Just don't trim it. I just think it's a very, very unique and beautiful plant that kind of works in almost any aquascape, just one that doesn't have a ton of shade in it, or else you're going to get that super leggy growth that you might not want. But again, that might be exactly what you want the plant to do. It's 100% up to you, and it's another reason why I like it so much. One thing to be aware of on this plant is just how delicate these leaves are. Okay, so if I'm down in here and I'm pulling things out, maybe I'm redoing my aquascape, I just want to be very careful not to go too crazy and bend a bunch of these leaves. As you can see here, if I just kind of bend it a little bit, it's going to snap. Okay, now that's not a problem if it's just a couple of them, right? Like, there's a lot of leaves in here, not a big deal, but just something to be aware of this plant. If you're going to trim them out and put them in another tank, just be careful that you don't do any damage to the plant. We talked a little bit earlier about water parameters, but I guess we didn't really get too specific. So I consider this to be a plant that can fit within a fairly wide range of parameters, okay? pH, water hardness, things of that nature. But I was actually just talking to Corey over at Aquarium Co-op, and I was asking him why he doesn't sell this plant on his website, and he was telling me that it was because this is a plant that does tend to require harder water. And of course, Corey over there doesn't have super hard water. He has actually the opposite of that. He has very soft water, and he has to harden it with crushed coral. And even by doing that, he was saying that in his experience, and it seems like the experience of a lot of other people too online, that this plant does not do well in soft water. Now, my water's not super soft, it's not super hard, it's very much right in the middle, and I seem to have pretty good luck with it. Now, maybe it's because my earthworm castings are super mineralized and they're able to get all the calcium, magnesium, potassium that they need from the substrate, but there's no way to know that for sure. So I just want to throw that out as a disclaimer. If you do have super soft water, then you might struggle a little bit with this plant, but I would definitely say it's not impossible to get good growth out of it, okay? But again, I'm just throwing you my experience. Everybody's gonna have a different one. I do run CO2 on this tank. You can see that here in the back, but it's a very small amount, okay? Especially compared to some of my other tanks where I'm really pumping it in here. So I wouldn't consider that to be a factor that this plant absolutely requires, but adding CO2 to any tank isn't gonna hurt it. It's only gonna help it, okay? So I would consider it to be something that you don't need, but it's gonna help, okay, no matter what. And even this really small, tiny amount that we're putting in here, whether or not that's really helping the plant that much, may or may not be true, but you know, just take that for what it is. Start off by focusing on two things, light and nutrient substrate. If you focus on those two things, I think you're gonna have a decent time with this plant. Alright guys, I think that's gonna do it for this week's plant profile. Did this make it to 10 minutes? I don't know. Let me know what you think about the new format. You know, do you want this video to be half as long, or, you know, do I need to cut down? Am I being super long-winded on stuff? Am I saying stuff that you don't even care about? Let me know down in the comments. I'm down to change it up. I appreciate you guys a lot. Thank you for all the support, and hopefully when we move this tank, we can preserve this nice Pogostemon. We'll see what happens. Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it. We'll see you next time.